Hello everyone, welcome back to the Christ MotoGP Podcast, and we are back for another show to review the Austrian Grand Prix. It wasn't a classic, but there is still some talking points from this weekend as Pecco Bagnaia opens up a 5-point lead over Jorge Martin in the championship. We'll also get on to what happened to Marc Marquez over the weekend, Jorge Martin's shower incident with his thumb, which was a talking point on Saturday morning, and plenty more from the weekend. Joining me is Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan. Pete, what was your thoughts on the weekend overall? Like I said, not a classic, but Bagnaia showing his true class at the minute. He's riding at a really superior level to everyone else, isn't he?
Yeah, the writing was on the wall a bit, wasn't it, from Friday practice when he was top of the timesheets. It wasn't not quite the dominance of Assen, shall we say, but yeah, when Pecco's fast straight away from day one, the others are in for a tough weekend, aren't they? And as you say, unfortunately, no one really got near him, did they? Also because of incidents and bad luck for others, but at the end of the day, he was just in a class of his own. And it made for a long 28 laps, I think, for those watching.
Yeah, Deb, we'll come on to that. Lewis, what was your takeaway from the weekend? Bagnaia's, we talked about it in the preview. If it did go to form, he would do what he did, and he did do that. It was pretty impressive from him, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like Pete said, from Friday, it was kind of obvious that was the way it was going to go, and you just, it was Pecco at his best. I think the circuit definitely kind of plays into his into his hands there. It's 3 Austrian Grand Prix wins on the bounce now. He is a bit of a circuit specialist, but you just kind of look at the pace versus everyone else, and it was just incredible. And the way he managed that race as well was really those early laps. That's where he did the damage. It wasn't a big lap time gain he had on Jorge Martin, but it was enough just to protect that lead. And then in Austria nowadays, with the tyre pressures, with the aero, with the ride height devices, you get stuck behind someone, you're going to find it really, really difficult to try and bridge that gap and make a move. Pecco, it was a great ride from a purely sporting perspective, but from a kind of tactical perspective as well, it was really, really well done.
Yeah, he mentioned that after the race. He kept just trying to eke out, like you said, the little bits. It wasn't like massive gaps to Martin, and it just shows you how he's able to think. You get a little bit of an insight to how Bagnaia is, Pete, in a race. He's so calculated, and he's thinking about, okay, if I get something like a little bit here, a tenth here and there, it's all about the bigger picture in the end of the Grand Prix, and it looked comfortable in the end because he had done the early work in the early laps, like Lewis said, and that's what was the difference maker, really, wasn't it?
It's a good point. Yeah, it's almost like the races now are back to front. We get all the action at the start, and then the end of the races are quiet. And yeah, I mean, if you take that battle between Martin and Bagnaia in both races, wasn't it? In those couple of opening laps, it was a great battle.
Yeah.
But as Lewis said, Pecco had a game plan, didn't he? And he knew he needed to get to the front early. And I think that's something that Martin's maybe acknowledging, that in future races they need to work more on that as well, and make sure that, I mean, he was clearly doing his best to hold Pecco off. Obviously in the sprint we saw the big stoppy and running wide, but perhaps his bike wasn't really set up for that full fuel tank battle, if you like, and so maybe that's something that Martin will look at in the future, because speed-wise, as Lewis has said, there's not really much between them, but tactically, Pecco knows when he needs to be fast, and he's making the difference there.
Yeah, he is making the difference, and like I say, 25 Grand Prix, MotoGP wins now for Bagnaia. Lewis puts him level with Kevin Schwantz, and that's a steam company, and I think when I posted a graphic yesterday on socials, and people were kind of surprised that he's had that much, and we're like, was this with the sprints? I'm like, no, this is just Grand Prix. It's like it's been pretty incredible the past 3 years for Pecco, and I think we're seeing him not at his peak, I would say, but he's really close to it, isn't he?
Yeah, I think we're kind of at the point where Pecco's really just hitting his stride now. Like you look back at maybe 2022, the title, and you can look at the Yamaha deficiencies as kind of helping him there. But last year and this year especially, he's really kind of proved that he is, he's the guy, he's the Ducati guy, he is the best Ducati rider right now, bar none. Martin is very close, but there's just those little things in Pecco's game right now that just elevate him, and we were talking about it before we started recording, and he's not that far away from Pedrosa's record. And if you think that Pedrosa's last MotoGP win was 2017,
yeah,
and you look at where Pecco is now after such a short space of time, yes, the Ducati's the best bike, but there's 8 Ducatis on the grid, and there's a lot of good riders on those bikes. So I don't think this is just simply a case of best bike, everyone else is so far behind. Pecco's really had to fight for this, and yeah, the fact that he's won so much this season and is only 5 points ahead is, clearly there's some things in his game he needs to tidy up, namely the sprints, which he mentioned at the weekend. He needs to. That's Martin's kind of real strong suit. But yeah, we are at a point where Pecco is very, very close to kind of as close to perfection as you can get as an athlete.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think you can see the confidence from him, can't you, Pete? When he just kind of, I don't know, he kind of reminds me. It's strange. He reminds me of Lorenzo a little bit in the sense of when he knows the game plan, he knows how he needs to execute it, he'll do it. But he's coming across so, like, even confident on a Friday and stuff, because it used to be kind of a hit and miss point for Bagnaia. He'd always be a bit slow to get out of the blocks, and he would maybe build into the weekend. But even the past few tracks where he knows that he's strong, he's just going out and he's just setting the marker down straight away. And it's like that must be a bit sort of head scratching and annoying for his rivals, because they're trying their hardest too, but he's not really letting them in, is he?
He's not, no. And I mean, it's only 5 points between them at the top of the standings, but is it 7 Grand Prix wins for Pecco now this year or something? To 2 for Martin?
To 2, yeah.
So imagine if we were under the old point system without sprint races. I mean, Bagnaia would be gone. He'd be have a huge point lead. So I think it's that, when you look at that and when you look at the stats that you guys have been talking about and look back at things, that you realise just how strong Pecco is at the moment, just what sort of performance he's putting in. It could be a bit misleading to look at the points. Oh, it's only 5 points in it, but certainly on Sundays, there's Pecco's in a class of his own.
Yeah, he really is in a class of his own. And I will say, Lewis, Jorge Martin had a good weekend. It's 4 second places in a row in terms of sprint the Grand Prix. But his weekend, it was just strange for him because he had that injury with cutting his thumb in the shower, and it looked like it was causing him a lot of pain, especially on Saturday morning. But he did. I mean, he got pole position in true Jorge Martin fashion. Like, the lap was just ridiculous that he done, but he made the mistake in the sprint, ran on at the chicane, then didn't leave enough of a gap to make up the time in this sector, and then got the long lap penalty. But 2 second places, like Pete said, only 5 points, but I just get the sense he's a step behind Bagnaia at the minute.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, Martin's got that consistency, which is what's keeping him in this fight. He might not have the out-and-out kind of Grand Prix win stats and maybe speed of Bagnaia when it comes to race pace, but he's at least there, like you said in the press conference. If second is a bad weekend, then that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing a real kind of maturity from Martin here, because he speaks a lot about, well, if it's not this weekend, my time will come. There's no panic stations. There's, he knows he's got the talent, he's got the bike, he's got the same opportunities as Pecco. He knows that there's going to be tracks coming up where he will be better. I think what the two of them differ is obviously Pecco can be a little bit inconsistent in terms of, making mistakes at quite crucial moments. Martin's been guilty of that this year too, but not to the same extent as Pecco. This was just a weekend to get the best he could, and that was second. And there's no shame in that when you're going up against a Pecco Bagnaia on top form like that. I mean, the lap time difference was not that big between them. It was about 0.12 per lap, which obviously builds up, but he did what he could, and that was all. And when you've given your all and that's the best you can come up with, you can't really be angry with that. And Martin's accepted that, and I think that's going to keep him in this title fight a lot longer than his speed. Is that mentality? He's not going to panic. He's not going to, oh no, what can we do? What can we do? He knows his time will come, and there will be points where, we'll be on this podcast speaking about Martin as being untouchable on a weekend.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're playing the long game, Pete. That's a real thing. And I think last year, he kind of, every time he was in front, he made the mistakes. But now he's playing the longer game. And yeah, like Lewis said, he's made mistakes this year, but not as costly as last year at certain points. It is a good weekend for him. And what would you expect to think going into tracks like Aragon, where he knows Bagnaia is going to be strong? But then we have the two Misano races where obviously he won last year, done the double. Yeah, granted, Bagnaia was injured after that Barcelona crash, but it's going to, I reckon, the championship's going to swing back and forth between these two. And like I say, a good assessment from Lewis there. I think that Martin has realised that the longer game and the bigger picture is, he still has chances down the road.
That's it, yeah. I mean, I think Martin's just got to sort of hold his nerve on these kind of weekends, isn't he? And he did that. It's a bit like Assen, where we said the best he could get was second. Try and put some pressure on. I guess the only mistake he made was when he did shortcut the chicane. Should he have perhaps just backed off a little bit more? There's an argument that the rule is a bit messy, really, isn't it? To try and 1 second. How does a rider know exactly what 1 second is and all that? But that's really the only mistake that I think he made. I think he just, well, speed-wise, yeah, he needed a bit more at a different time in the race, and maybe that was set up. Maybe the team could have helped, but otherwise, what more could he have done? Pecco was just untouchable on his day, and then you've just got to get what you can, and I think he did that. I think he's, as you guys said, he's keeping himself in the fight and waiting for better tracks, as you mentioned, that might come up for him in the future where he can fight. So, yeah, I think it was a great weekend for him all round, considering when Pecco's at this level, what do you do? So, he held his nerve, brought the bike home. The points gap is virtually nothing, isn't it? 9 rounds to go, 5 points. And let's see what happens. And as Lewis said, the inconsistency of Bagnaia, that's where Martin's got to be ready, isn't it? He's got to be ready to take advantage. There's not going to be every weekend where Pecco's like this. I know we've spoken about how great he's doing, but he's not great in every race. There are moments that arise, even if it's not your fault, technical problems, whatever. And that's when Martin's got to capitalise on it and just keep the pressure on, isn't it? And keep the pressure on and see what happens at the end of the year.
Exactly, that's it. And like you say, 5 points, it is nothing. I still can't believe it's only 5 points because, like you say about Bagnaia's golf in the Grand Prix, there's 5 Grand Prix race wins difference there, but still the sprints and just, like you say, good points about Martin just being able to capitalise when he needs to, when Bagnaia makes mistakes. Yeah, I can't wait for the rest of the season. I honestly, it's so close right now, and I hope that it stays like that, but someone who will go away from Austria, Lewis, a bit disappointed, will be Marc Marquez. I mean, he said it was his best weekend, how he felt going into the races, and he looked good in the sprint. He made a really good start, and he was closing down Bagnaia, went in second. I think he got it down to about 1.1 with a few laps to go, and he made the mistake at turn 3, lost the front, and he accepted that. He just made a mistake, but yesterday was absolute chaos for him in the first few laps, wasn't it? At first he had that issue with his tyre. I mean, if you haven't seen it, there's a clip of his mechanics near knocking him over with 30 minutes to go for the start of the race because a cracked valve on the front tyre. They had to then change that. They managed to get it done on the grid. Marquez then says he's thinking so much about keeping heat into the front tyre that he initially gets the front start device engaged, and then he has a look again, tries to get heat in and disengages it, and then doesn't have enough speed to get it back in. That costs him at the start massively. Has it coming together with Morbidelli, drops all the way back to 13th, but then produces a really good comeback ride to P4, Lewis, and I suppose it's a story what could have been because his pace did look really good when he got some clean air. He was able to match Bagnaia essentially, so that's really it for Marquez, isn't it? What could have been?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's another sign of we need to get rid of these ride-height devices, sooner than 2027. It's just, it's the same for everyone, but it's like that type of a situation. Yeah, he's the guy. 4 or 5 years ago, you start like that, you would have been fine. Now it's everyone has all these launch devices, and it just. Yeah, so it ended up kind of being quite a dangerous situation, actually, and it's we got away with it, but we very nearly didn't. We've seen big accidents at Turn 1 before in Austria. Mark was asked about this. He was fairly cordial about it, but he more than most has been really anti all these devices. He wants to control back for the riders, which I fundamentally believe is what would make, Sunday's race a bit more interesting if we had less of this kind of intervention. But yeah, on to, as for Mark's race, it was unfortunate. He did a great job, and especially under the circumstances, because his tyre pressures would have been set for a different race. Definitely. So he was having to sort of fight his way through with, I assume, tyres that would have been way higher in pressure, and obviously having crashed already in the sprint, I suspect that would have been in the back of his mind. So I think we saw a real knife edge race from Mark than maybe was kind of apparent on television. What would have happened without that? It's really hard to tell. Like, his kind of average pace was sort of 4th, in that sort of top 4. But the caveat was he was doing quite a lot of overtaking. But yeah, I mean, if you kind of stretch that out over the course of the weekend, had he been in fourth and doing the pace he was from the off, he was still 10 seconds away from Pecco. So it's quite hard to see or to guess where Marquez would have been. Probably, I think he probably could have battled with Bastianini for the podium. The pace was quite similar, but could he have breached that gap? I don't know. But yeah, definitely a missed opportunity for a podium from Marc. But this is, this is the games. Every race is a learning race for him and the team. And I think, the broken tyre valve thing is anything that can happen. But I think it's maybe kind of indicative of, Gresini is a smaller team, and therefore, it's not a factory team. So something like that is maybe more likely to happen there than, at a factory team. There's just that's the nature of satellite teams, and they're kind of in a position week in, week out they're not really used to, consistently. So these things are going to happen. But I think Marc's ride to fourth can be chalked up as one of his better ones of the season.
Yeah, I think I'm safe to say that he was the only one that really provided any entertainment value yesterday. He was in the overtakes. They're doing plenty at the chicane and stuff, and it's kind of the story of his season. We've talked about it. Like, everything goes well on like a Friday, and then there's something that happens, and then he never really has that consistent run. And he keeps saying that it's a building year for him, and it's he's building into next year. That's the real time, but. You could tell that he was a bit annoyed that he didn't come away with 2 podiums, because he referenced the Catalunya round where it was a disaster for him, he'd said, but he ended up having a second in the sprint and a third in the Grand Prix, and it's just how it is, isn't it, for Marquez this year? It seems that it just goes either way sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, the fall in the sprint, to be honest, I think I said on the podcast, I said he needs to go for it if he's got a chance. And I think, although he was disappointed, there was that element of, well, I was trying to close down Bagnaia. He could have settled for a safe second place, but he saw he had a chance, as you were saying. He saw that, maybe I can make a race of it here. He went for it. It didn't pay off. I think that's fair enough, because what's another second in a sprint race anyway for him? But I think, the main Grand Prix is a more painful one for him, for the reasons that you guys have said, that it was one of his best weekends. He was fast, and it would have been interesting to see what he could do if he was up there at the front and in the mix there. But yeah, I mean, I don't think for 1 second that he threw away a guaranteed race win on Sunday. I mean, let's put it into perspective as well. Pecco was in a class of his own on the GP24, as we say. Marc obviously on the year-old bike. Martin as well is at the top of his game. So I don't think this wasn't a complete victory thrown away or anything, but it was clearly a missed opportunity. And as Lewis says, the numbers say probably a podium would have been, he'd been in the fight with Bastianini, maybe a bit better. Who knows? But I think he's frustrated, obviously, but it's not the end of the world. It is a clean weekend, as you guys have said. It's almost like something always seems to happen to him, doesn't it? And the warm up, being fastest in the warm up, everything kind of sort of to be looking into place for him for a solid weekend, and then chaos, as he put it, before the race.
Yeah. It really was, and it was just like I said, we haven't seen the footage of him near getting run over. I've never seen him look so shocked, because you can imagine he does that same walk every single time from his little the back of the truck in, and he gets really focused, and he just looks so surprised by what was going on, the chaos happening around him. But a good salvage job from Marc Marquez, and I'd say entertainment value, he's definitely the clear winner of the weekend for that. But Lewis, I want to come on I've seen a few comments on socials about the dominance of Ducati, and especially the GP24 this year. People saying it was the most boring race of the season. You're not going to get a classic every weekend, and there's other contributing factors. I think that the Red Bull ring has lost a bit of its sparkle. I don't know what it is the past few years. It just doesn't feel like how it used to be. And is it fair to people who are saying that this is a boring championship? There's 5 points between the top two, and it's surely it's not as bad as people are making out.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, you kind of look at the rest of the races this season. For the most part, have all really been exciting. Especially that first half of the championship, where we're kind of every weekend something was happening. We had great racing. The championship battle's been tight. It's a 20-round championship, but a good, exciting championship battle. It doesn't necessarily equate to 20 exciting Grand Prix. Thrill-a-minute stuff. We're not going to see hundreds and hundreds of overtakes every race. That's just not how it works. Obviously, it would have been good to have seen that Pecco Martin thing at the start of the Grand Prix, throughout the Grand Prix, or at the end of the Grand Prix, but Yeah, I think there's two things about this, and I'll tackle the track thing first. Is I think a lot of people have kind of been like, oh, since they added the chicane, it's made the Red Bull Ring rubbish. I don't think that's the reason for the rubbish racing at Austria lately. I think the problem is just the bikes. It's a lot of low gear acceleration, corners and zones. So when you've got ride height devices where the rider just has to twist the throttle and go, and everyone's kind of, there's very little difference between how people can exit corners now and make a difference. That's not helping. The aerodynamics really doesn't help, on a track like that especially. You go back, even sort of 2020 when we didn't really have too many of these devices and the racing was great. And before that, we always had coming to Austria was a guaranteed thriller,
It was.
So I don't think the circuit has anything to blame. I think it's the makeup of the bikes. I think the claims that the GP24 is making this a boring championship, I don't believe that's the case either. We've seen lots of exciting racing between the GP24s. We've seen other manufacturers get in the mix. I think fundamentally when there's a point when there's a manufacturer or bike being dominant, it's not their fault if it makes the racing boring. It's on if anyone, it's the rest of the grid's fault. Aprilia should be doing better, KTM should be doing better, the Japanese manufacturers should be doing better. It's not on Ducati to kind of underdevelop a bike to make it
worse. Yeah.
Well, exactly. It's not. That's it'd be like watching the top football team in the league just running backwards just because they want to make a bit of a game of it. It's we've got arguably it's kind of what we want. It harks back to the good old days. A lot of people like to talk about it. Of when we had like Rossi and Lorenzo on the Yamahas, kind of equal machinery. You had like two guys fighting for the championship. Was kind of what we got, and it has been exciting. I would like to see Pecco and Martin have a bit more on track kind of needle. We haven't really seen that over the past couple of years very much, or not as much as I would like to for two of the best guys. But yeah, I don't think it's a boring. No, it's not a boring championship. You look at the numbers, you look at everything, you look at the races. It just isn't a boring championship. The GP24s aren't making it boring. Sometimes you're going to have rubbish races, but I think that's down to the rules more than anything.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's like, people forgetting the first, like you said, the first half of the season, like we had those unbelievable races at Coda, we had that one with Marquez and Bagnaia at Jerez, even Le Mans was great. We've had some absolutely cracking races, and I know for a fact that plenty of four-wheel fans, F1 fans, will be crying out for that every weekend to get that. We can't have it perfect every single time. And a good point, Lewis, I think back 20 plus years now, 2003 always comes to my mind for Honda's domination. The top five in the championship were all on Hondas, and it was just like you could guarantee it would be a Rossi, BRG, Gibberna at the front. It was the same every weekend, but it happens, and it's like things change. And Pete, what's your take on it? I think that there's people just, I think, want to have the perfect weekend every time, and just not going to get that. Sport just doesn't allow that sometimes.
I think that's it, isn't it? Yeah, it's like you're going to get 0-0 draws, aren't you, in football sometimes, and that's just the way it is. I think, as Lewis said, that the track, I mean, Austria is the track with the most full throttle, isn't it? And I think there's plays into what Lewis says about it being about the bikes, and what can the rider do? What the rider can personally, the difference they can make is obviously reduced when you're just holding the throttle full open, if you like. Sure, you can play with lean angle to try and reduce the wheelie, that kind of thing, but if you look at the timesheets, there was a lot of sort of 2x2 almost, wasn't it? The KTMs were together, the Aprilias were together, the Ducatis at the front. So, and I think Bastianini's actually a good illustration of this. We were expecting, weren't we? Oh, maybe he'll come on strong at the end of the race, but he wasn't able to because, as he said, the track layout, it's short corners. He makes the difference in the long corners, saving the tyre on the lean angle, and there weren't really that much of them. So, therefore, Bastianini wasn't able to make that big difference at the end because it's just turn the bike in, pick it up quick, and away you go. And what can you do then? So, yeah, I think giving more back to the riders, that's what these 2027 rules should be about, isn't it? I think they have recognised that something needs to be done. It's difficult because Ducati obviously came up with the devices and things that were within the rules, and you've got to give people, you don't want to punish people for being innovative and within the rules. So it's finding that balance point, isn't it, of rewarding teams for their engineering skill, but keeping the racing, as exciting as possible. And yeah, the bottom line is that we've got another couple of years until we get some things reduced from the bikes, the downforce, the ride height devices, and everything else. So yeah, I think you can't sum up a whole season by one race and jump to a conclusion. And the easy answer is look at the championship standings. 5 points between the top two guys. I mean that's a great situation to be in at this stage of the season, isn't it? Really, I think in terms of entertainment overall.
And I think just to add to that, I mean, people like to kind of go on about the good old days and back in my day and blah, blah, blah. There's always a very kind of rose-tinted glasses looking at things. When it comes to this sort of argument, there's always one kind of moment in MotoGP history that stands out in my mind, and it's Barcelona 2009. And I remember that commentary, it kept mentioning, the papers were saying we haven't had last corner overtakes for years, this championship's boring, blah, blah, blah. Everyone looks at that race as the best race ever. And it's like, oh my God, it was a great time, but blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you kind of remember the rest of the championship, and it wasn't that exciting. Yeah. And it's history warps your perspective because you only remember the good bits. Nobody remembers those like rubbish sort of 2011 races and race incidents where we've kind of put them to the back of our mind because they aren't standout, and that's just the way history goes. And, in 5-10 years' time, we'll look back on this season, everyone will remember Jerez, and we'll remember all the good points. We're not going to sit and remember that rubbish Austrian Grand Prix we had. You think of the Austrian Grand Prix, you think back to 2019. That's how your brain works. It's... so that kind of argument as well of, it used to be better. No, it didn't. It kind of... There were bits where it were good, but it didn't used to be better. It's not really any better or worse than it is at any other point in history. It's how you it's what you make of it, really.
Yeah, no, that I agree. I see that a lot. It's like, well, I remember watching like certain races in the 2012 season. I'm like, well, I mean, if you want to talk about some absolute snooze fests, go back and watch those races. It's like it happens every time. And like you say, history does. It changes people's perspective, and they think about the good times. But we've had unbelievable races that, like you say, we'll look back on, and like it'll just be like the 2024 season had some absolute bangers in there, and it needs to be highlighted more. And I don't think the championship's in a bad place. People are thinking it's like F1 standard of boring. I'm like, well, no. I've watched a load of races with Verstappen 2 years ago where he just cleared up the road, and it's like, well, we're not at that level. It's not going to be like that.
No, and I would say as well, if you look at the current F1 season, not to descend this into an F1 podcast, but you look, okay, we've had quite a few different winners, but they're all really rubbish races. Like, they're all boring. Just because you've had multiple different winners doesn't mean it's an exciting championship. I would rather see the same two guys winning the championship, but it'd be really, really hard fought. Really, that's more exciting to me than having 5-6 different guys winning. So again, it's about we got more winners. Okay, well. The Formula E Championship has lots of winners week in, week out. Doesn't mean it's the most exciting racing.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's it. Pete, just to finally cover this, we can expect some good races, I think, going forward, because the tracks that we're coming into, especially, I think, the flyaways, are going to be absolutely brilliant. I always tell people, like, what races should I watch if I want to get into MotoGP? I always say, if you want to commit to it, watch Phillip Island. You need to watch that, and I think we've got those races that always produce good racing. Even Valencia's had some good races the past few years as well because of the title fights too. We've got a great championship, and I don't want to see people just kind of switch it off because someone wins by a comfortable margin over one race.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a unique track for the reasons you guys have mentioned, isn't it? And so you can't base it. It'd be like basing the season on the Sachsenring or something else like that. It's the season's made up of all different types of circuits, and there's lots of those that traditionally produce good racing. And as you say, the flyways, then you have the unpredictability of different weather conditions, no private testing, that kind of thing, that just adds to that. Even Aragon coming up, I mean, that wasn't on the calendar last year. It's been resurfaced. Michelin are going to bring an extra tyre, front and rear, so there were 3 options each to choose from. So even that in itself will shake things up a little bit there. Let's see, let's hope. And it's just one of those things. I don't think one relatively boring race, it's not the end of the world, is it?
It's definitely not. And what I will say, I didn't like the commentators yesterday teasing the amount of times we've seen the clouds and the rain. That was getting me really excited because I was thinking, are we going to get rain? And it was like, it was just hot, it was getting darker. And Bagnaia even said, I think about 6 laps to go after, he said he seen the clouds at turn 3 and it was black, and he was like, I'm not going to say what he said because he actually swore, and he was like, "This better not be happening now." But don't be teasing me with rain, because I love it when I get a flag to flag, and it's like, oh, it'll happen eventually at some point this season. But yeah, I think the championship's in a good spot. That's what I'm trying to say here. But yeah, get back to KTM home race. Lewis, it was an up and down weekend, especially for Pedro Acosta on the Friday. He had a massive crash in practice, and it was a result of having a crash prior to that with the damaged colder tire. But he looked a bit lost compared to, say, Binder, who looked pretty strong, and Miller as well in the sprint too.
Yeah, it was an interesting one for Pedro. We know he's got quite a good record at the Red Bull Ring, so I think we all kind of came here expecting him to be a bit better than he was. I think he still managed to get, there was flashes of speed, but the crashes didn't help. He had this massive off, which at turn 4, which was, could have been worse. So he was, the fact he walked away from that one and everyone else walked away from that one was great. But yeah, but he just, even in the races, he just wasn't really able to make any sort of forward momentum. The KTM looked okay this weekend, but I kind of expected better. We know Paul Espargaro obviously tested quite a lot there recently, so you'd have thought that maybe they would have hit the ground running a bit better than they did. It's just difficult to sort of really genuinely assess where KTM is. I don't think Pedro's performance is kind of indicative of where it is at, but I don't think Binder's performance is also indicative of where it's at. I think it's probably, under normal circumstances, still behind the Aprilias. I think we had this kind of harder construction rear tyre for Austria, which tends to sort of play about with the kind of pecking order a little bit, Ducati aside. You think back to last year, we had races like that. We tended to see the Honda do quite well, and I think, I don't think KTM made any sort of real big steps this weekend. I just think the circumstances suited them, the bike, and Binder, obviously, when he's got a bike, he can kind of do good things on it, and Jack as well before he crashed. Let's be fair to Jack there. When they've got bikes, they can do what they need to do on them. They can generally deliver fairly decent results, but yeah, compared to last year when Brad was on the podium and kind of gave Pecco a little bit of a challenge, did kind of expect them to be a bit closer to the front. But I think, this has sort of shown the hill that KTM still has to climb.
Yeah, it does. And Pete, what about the aerodynamics that Paul Espargaro was testing? I mean, that new prototype bike even sounded different too when you hear it on the TV. It was like a real different sound of it, but people were absolutely mind blown by the aero that KTM had brought. It was pretty. It looked crazy. So
it did, didn't it? Yeah, obviously they have to work outside the aero body rules and all that kind of thing. So they have to put the wings in places that aren't restricted, if you like, wasn't it? So that's why they mounted them there. And yeah, it shows that KTM are working. They're trying. As you say, different engine, it seems, which under these concession rules, the revised bandings, the 4 different groups, the KTMs are allowed for their wild cards to have a different engine. Now, the bad news, of course, for the others is that they can't change the engine during the season. So they're not going to get Espargaro's engine this year. So that would be work for next year. But things like the aero, maybe the frame, maybe those kind of things could move across. But a difficult race, I think, for Acosta. I think he said it was one of the hardest of his career, and didn't really know why. Just no acceleration, and really at a loss to sort of explain it. And I think, as Lewis said, the KTM was the clear, if you like, second best after Ducati, but that was really also because it's not a great track for Aprilia, is it? Aleix did a great job in the sprint, also in qualifying, but a great job in the sprint, and you saw how delighted he was. But again, that just underlined how much of almost a shock it was that they were competitive at this track. Normally it's sort of their worst of the year. So for KTM to be ahead of them is not a great achievement, and they'll be looking more, I think, at that 18-second gap between Brad and Bagnaia. That's a big hill to climb, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And Lewis, just touching on Aprilia, it's, I guess Pete said, Espargaro had a bit of a messy Friday too, and then he kind of turned it around on Saturday, and he was genuinely surprised that he got the podium in the sprint. But the other Aprilias, we did mention in the last podcast, that would it be one of them or would it be a couple? But it was really just Espargaro that led the way. Vinales was pretty anonymous the whole weekend, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of just carrying on what we've seen from Maverick. Obviously, kind of finished ahead of Aleix in the Grand Prix, but I don't really think, again, that was indicative of any real jumping performance. They just obviously we know that the Aprilia really struggles to hang on to its tyres come, the end of the races, and I think that's just what played a factor there. I mean we come to Austria and we know it's a difficult track for the RSGP. It wasn't clearly they do need to work on that if they want to be fighting for championships next year. They can't. You can't really have bogey tracks. You've got to have that consistency everywhere, and it's not just Austria. Like the Aprilia doesn't have consistency right now. It's good in the sprints, it's good in those half distance races, but as soon as you kind of put slightly harder tyres on and you go a longer distance, it just doesn't seem to have the same pace. It can't hold on to its tyres, and I think what was really quite telling for me was after Silverstone, we've got all the riders and Massimo Rivola saying we really don't know what's going on here. We're clearly doing something wrong, and Alesia's Friday was really not what they needed, because they talked about Rivola spoke about needing to kind of maybe sacrifice Fridays and maybe risk going in Q1 to try and get on top of this issue, and with Espargaro not doing as much running as they really needed him to do, that didn't help. And yeah, it's you'd think going to Aragon that they'll be a bit better. It's always been a circuit that suited the Aprilia, even back in the bad old days when that bike really wasn't very competitive. Aleix was always really good around there, so you have to think that going into Aragon they'll be good. But yeah, they don't really seem like they're touching on what they need to improve. We had Savadori there, but they didn't look like the bike was all that different. Still no carbon frame, which we've been sort of long waiting for to see that race debut on the Aprilia. And I mean, that's an interesting point, because obviously KTM turned a lot of heads last year with that, but they haven't made a big step forward this year, and I wonder how much that's kind of scared other manufacturers into thinking, well, actually, is the carbon frame the right way to go? Nobody else seems to think so.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of questions for Aprilia, and especially going to maybe get a lot of answers, Pete, for the Misano test, for example, to see what they actually bring and see if it's going to change anything. But it's, like Lewis said, it's a bit of a head-scratching weekend for them. It's like they don't really know. They do know the direction they need to go in, but it's just very messy at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah, they'd be all right if it was a sprint-only championship, wouldn't they? I think Vinales would be top 3 or something in that, yeah. But on points. But yeah, braking, I think, is the thing, isn't it? And they've tried to work on that a bit this year. They know it was a weakness, but I think Austria really underlined that there's still a long way to go on that. Exactly what it is, but that sort of hard straight line, maximum braking when the tyres are sort of, when the tyres are not new, let's say, when they start to get older, they degrade. They just don't seem to be able to get the same performance out of them as the Ducatis, obviously, which are the guys to beat. But it looks like a long way to go for them, doesn't it? And but again, Austria is a bit of a unique track, so let's see where their average is. Let's see when we get back to these. As Lewis pointed out, Aragon has always been a great one for Aleix, so they could well bounce back and be in the podium fight there. I'd certainly expect Aleix to be fighting to ahead of the KTMs probably at Aragon. So let's see. Yeah, as you rightly say, Misano test, their local track as well. That's the last chance for any big changes, I would say, for this year, isn't it? So yeah, that'll be a big test for them.
It will be. And just to stick with Aprilia, just to add in, Agura officially confirmed at Trackhouse Racing for 2025 and 2026. Talked about it in the last podcast. And then Agura had a fantastic weekend up until Saturday morning. Suffered his first crash of the season and was declared unfit after fracturing something in his right wrist, which is just incredible. I mean, talk about unlucky for Agura, but at least he's got the MotoGP contract, and it looked like he was going to have a really strong weekend in Moto2, but then what happened, and it's just but that championship Moto2, we'll talk about it, I think, in another podcast. I mean, Sergio Garcia had an absolute disaster, and the championship lead only grew really by, I think it was 3 points or 4 points, so Agura's still in there, but he has a big uphill task coming back with a wrist injury and stuff. But yeah, Aprilia have got their future sorted, they've got their lineup sorted now, officially for both teams. So yeah, Agura and MotoGP next year with Raul Fernandez at Trackhouse. I want to come lastly to the Japanese manufacturers, Lewis. I will say, Taka Agami really impressed me yesterday. I didn't see anything of him because of the broadcast, obviously, but scoring 2 points for Honda. He looked, from what I've seen and looked at his lap times, the strongest out of the Hondas. Yamaha had a really tough weekend, so they did, but this is something that I think we're just trying to usually expect now from these manufacturers, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Nakagami putting in kind of one of his better performances of the season while his future's in jeopardy is, I hate to be cynical about it, but no, I mean, the Honda obviously introduced this kind of, we've been billing it as a new engine. They've all said it's not really new, it's just an updated kind of configuration that was in the two factory team bikes, and I think in Nakagami's as well. I think Zarco stuck with the other spec. They all said coming into the weekend, it's not going to be a big step, and we saw that, but clearly, Taka was able to kind of get the best out of it, and there was at least a little hint of something going forward. I mean, it's always been kind of a tricky track for the Honda, even in its kind of good days. It was always a bit of, the low gear accelerations never really suited that bike, and especially now when it doesn't have any rear grip. So they've come away with the best that they could, really, and I think Taka does deserve a lot of praise. We now know sort of in the next few weeks we should get a fairly big update for them. We know that both Japanese manufacturers at Misano from this week, and they're going to be doing, test, race. But the Taka's result at Austria is kind of well timed from that perspective. If there is a really big update coming, kind of around about Misano, kind of race time, whatever one it is, it's going to be, at least they've got now a foundation to build on, at least, so hopefully that this is the start of something better. I think Yamaha, we know that Austria is always a bad circuit for it, and it really is just come here, get through it. Fabio was riding quite well until he got the track limits penalty. Easy done at Austria. We've seen so many people get that punishment. But yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to shout about for those two manufacturers right now, but that's just, I think over the next few weeks is when we'll see, a bit of an upturn in pace. And I would like to think that certainly those two Misano races will see a lot better showings for them. Possibly, I would actually kind of, as a dark horse prediction for Misano to sort of, I could see Fabio being a podium challenger, which with all the data, they're going to have so much more data than everyone else coming into those weekends, and the Yamaha suits that track. I think, there will be better days ahead, at least in brief. But yeah, not a lot to shout about right now.
Yeah, I think that's something, Pete, isn't it? With, like you've mentioned, the tests at Misano within a race, and the test is like, I think they're there. It is today, isn't it? They're testing, I think. So, they're gonna know the place like the back of their hands, and I would expect Yamaha, like Lewis said, to be much more comfortable around Misano than Honda per se. But it was a tough weekend for Yamaha. I just looked at the results there. Quartararo was 18th, Rins was 16th. Just a real grind, really, for them, wasn't it?
Yeah, it just really highlights their grip issues, doesn't it? As we're saying, at this kind of track where the rider doesn't have that much influence over the bike compared to other tracks, compared to the performance-wise over the lap time. I think it just really highlights their weak points, which, as we've known, they've had for a long time now, and it just shows that I think with the Honda guys, they're making slow progress in the right direction, but 30 seconds plus from the winner, isn't it? It's there's a long way to go yet, and. As you guys have said, Misano, a high grip track, a very different track. I think there's reasons to be optimistic there, and as you say, throw in all the test data as well, and potentially some big updates. And they do have reason to be optimistic. But yeah, certainly I think this will be the Austria weekend. There wasn't a lot, especially at Yamaha. I think that would have been. They know it's difficult for them, but I think to drop also behind the Hondas. Really, Quartararo's been that guy, hasn't he? Winning the Japanese Cup, as we've called it, sort of most weekends. So for him especially to drop that far back, a difficult one. So the Misano test can't come soon enough, I think, especially for Yamaha.
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot of changes with those bikes. I imagine there's going to be plenty of things tested, and who knows? Like I say, we're already projecting what we think it could be, but I could imagine Yamaha making a step on so with Honda too. But yeah, I mean, it's not much to shout about when you're talking about Honda getting 2 points in a Grand Prix. It's like a real big thing. It's crazy how things have changed over 5 years, really. So yeah, we hope for more positive things for Yamaha and Honda going forward. But that's pretty much it for this weekend. Like I say, championship's still close, and we go to Aragon, a circuit which I absolutely love. I think it's a brilliant circuit for motorbike racing. It always delivers good racing. We've seen plenty of battles in the past. Different manufacturers being at the front. yeah, I'm quite optimistic for a really good weekend. And yeah, we'll have a preview of that next week for all you listeners out there. If you've enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, like the video, comment, tell us what you thought of the Austrian Grand Prix. And yeah, if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, leave us a 5-star review. It helps us massively on the charts. Anything else to add, gents? Any final comments?
That
sums it up, yeah.
Let's hope for better racing next time, I think is probably what we're hoping for. But I think Austria was Austria. It's Pecco shouldn't be nothing should be taken away from his performance. The fact that the others couldn't keep up with him, I mean, that's what it comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah.
But let's not draw big conclusions from it and think that the whole season is going to be like that. I think there's a lot of close racing to come.
Exactly, and we'll end it on that. Thank you for listening, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.